Hi, Lagim fam. Before we start with today's episode, I want to let you know that I host another podcast called Asia in the Shadows. It is a weekly true crime podcast that features crime stories from all over Asia. You can listen to at least 15 episodes on any of your preferred podcasting platforms right now if you have not done so yet. I also feature or will feature some Filipino stories in that podcast, so you definitely have an extra sweet incentive to support that podcast as well. Okay, now on to today's episode. In 2018, on the island of Biliran in the small village of Talustusan, a 23-year-old man who remained and still remains unnamed in the press for privacy purposes recorded a phone conversation with an older man who he trusted in the past. We will call this young man Paulo. As Paulo recorded this conversation with this older man who he once trusted, he realized that things were different now. The older man on the other line was someone who had taken advantage of him since he was 12 years old. Paulo thought back to the day that trust was broken. He was taken into the bathroom of the church's little rectory, and there he was molested. Paulo did not think he could actually say anything or turn to anyone until a chance encounter with an American tourist changed all that. The tourist was curious about the older man and his generosity towards other local boys. He was not just any man, however, he was a priest. His name was Father Pius Hendricks. So the tourist asked Paulo a few more questions. In the process of trying to answer the questions, it dawned on Paulo that Hendricks' abuse would never stop. Paulo's younger brother was now one of the local boys to whom Hendricks had become very generous of late. Paulo suddenly felt a rising panic in him. Paulo now feared that his brother would be the next boy to be taken to the little rectory, and so he needed to protect him. He reported Hendricks straight to the police in November 2018 and agreed to record a conversation with the priest, which led to his arrest shortly after. Investigations into Hendricks later revealed that he had been the parish priest in Biliran for the past 40 years. And in all those 40 years, countless young boys were abused and silenced, suffering from their trauma from the time they were abused until way into their adulthood, shattering countless hopes and dreams. Only a year later, somewhere in Cadiz City, a family's whole world was about to come crashing down the same way the world of those young boys from Biliran did. But this time, people were not inclined to be silent anymore. Once again, the Catholic Church would be forced to take a serious look into their own priests and how some of them had seriously hurt the most vulnerable members of the Church in some of the most impoverished corners of the world. This is the case of Father Aron Buenacosa. Mabuhay! My name is Christine Abrigana and you are listening to episode 3 of Lagim, a Filipino true crime podcast. In case you're new here, welcome. I cover both well-known and lesser-known Filipino true crime stories every other Friday. If you want to know how to support my podcast, please listen until the very end of this episode and also check the show notes for further information. Just a reminder, the names used here to address the victim and her family are not their real names. This is for their protection. Please also note that details in this story may be triggering for some people as they involve assault and sexual abuse of minors. So please take care of yourself whilst listening. You never really know when that one moment arrives that will forever change your life. When it does arrive, it completely upends your life and everything in it, and there's no turning back. For a small family in Cadiz City, that moment came sometime in late February 2019. Bem was home from another uncomfortably hot day at work. It was a Friday, the 22nd of February, and she was glad to be able to spend a bit of one-on-one time with her daughter, 4-year-old Mia, who she was bathing. And then she noticed it. There was no mistaking what she was looking at. Her young daughter's genitals seemed to have a gap. I can only imagine the thoughts running through her mind whilst her heartbeat was picking up pace. She then asked her daughter what had happened and whether someone had touched her down there. But even before she could finish her question, she herself had already started crying. Mia did not answer initially, but after being asked a second time, she mentioned a name. Father Aron Buenacosa. Bem could not believe what she was hearing. In an interview months later, she would describe feeling like her heart was going to explode after listening to her daughter. And then suddenly a lot of things that had happened in the past made sense to Bem. At the same time, these things filled her with disgust, fear, and guilt. It all started when Bem got a job as an executive assistant for the St. Joseph the Worker parish in January 2019. I can imagine that Bem was happy to have gotten the job because, amongst many things, it would do away with her childcare problems. The parish had a daycare, which meant, for Bem, that she could leave her 4-year-old Mia there while she worked. Sure, the daycare was only open in the morning, but Bem was probably still grateful to have this perk. And so, a routine was established. Bem dropped off Mia at the daycare every day, where she stayed until 10 in the morning on weekdays. After 10 o'clock in the morning, Mia would join her mom in her parish office, where she stayed until her mom's workday was over. Things were going well. Bem and Mia's routine worked, and life was much simpler without the hassle of looking for someone to mind Mia during weekdays. But things shifted somehow a couple of weeks into the job. Mia started acting differently around Buenacosa. She cried a lot, and Bem could not figure out why. Mia's family had known Buenacosa since Mia's infancy. In fact, he was the priest who baptized her. Buenacosa, after all, had been the assigned parish priest since 2014, so he was not fresh off the boat or at all new to Cadiz City. And so the day after Mia revealed to Bem what Buenacosa had done to her, Bem went into work still reeling from what she had learned from her young daughter. According to an article by the Washington Post, Bem decided to talk to a few of her colleagues at the parish about her next steps. Ultimately, she decided to confront Buenacosa with Mia in tow. Buenacosa, of course, denied the accusations, going as far as kneeling down in front of Mia. Mia, according to Bem, was crying and trembling. The confrontation between the angry mother and the priest did not go unnoticed. You see, before the confrontation took place, Buenacosa was saying Mass. So churchgoers who were still around after Mass ended heard the exchange between Bem and Buenacosa. One of the worried churchgoers was a police officer who, thank goodness, had the brilliant initiative to call in some of his on-duty colleagues. It did not take long for the police to pull up by the parish and still hear parts of the confrontation and even see and hear Buenacosa plead with Bem, asking her to not press charges. Soon enough, Bem and Mia found themselves at the local police station for questioning. Social workers attempted to ascertain if the abuse had been a one-off thing or something that had been done before. If the latter, the social workers wanted to know when it all started. Since we are talking about a scared and traumatized 4-year-old girl, I did not expect her to have perfect recall of what day and time it all started, but as far as the social workers could glean from their questioning, the abuse started around February 8th. According to the Washington Post article that I've just mentioned earlier, when asked how many times Buenacosa had touched her or done something wrong, the little girl, quote, showed her 10 fingers and her teeth, gestures that police and the city prosecutor interpreted as the girl trying to indicate many incidents, end of quote. When asked what Buenacosa exactly had done to her, the girl stated that he touched and kissed her private parts in both a bathroom and his private quarters. The Cadiz City PNP opened an investigation after this interview. They believed Mia's account and they said that the girl had been consistent in her recollection of the abuse that she had to endure. Now, the next step in the investigation was to get Mia to a medical examiner in the hope that any forensic evidence can be collected or any observation made that can further substantiate her claim of abuse. At the Cadiz Health Office, a medical examiner who specialized in gynecology checked Mia over and stated that there was, quote, a gap in the area between the labia, a clear deviation from what should be seen in a child of that age, end of quote. The timeline of events from this point on is not exactly clear from the existing reports so far, but what we do know, at least from that Washington Post article, is that several people close to the parish, the family, and Buenacosa were interviewed for the purpose of aiding the investigation. And it was when these witnesses gave their statements did it become clear how brazen Buenacosa was. For example, one of Mia's daycare teachers stated that Buenacosa seemed to have taken a liking to Mia. Bem later confirmed that Buenacosa had the habit of quote-unquote borrowing Mia from classes, taking her to his room only for Mia to later emerge with candies.
I trust him because siya, ganit pare siya, and then gatiwala talaga kami sa kanya. And then, garespeto. Ginaano lang namin, pabayaan lang namin. Yun ang ritual na ginaano. Parang iyon ang ugali niya. Pag mag-play sa mga bata, ginakadol niya yan. And then, ginabite niya sa dito. Takot na takot ang mga bata sa kanya. Ginaran after niya yan palagi. Iyon ang mga sequence.
Mia's aunt also stated that she had noticed how Mia cried several times after her encounters with Aron Buenacosa. The same aunt also noticed how Mia sometimes seemed reluctant to go near the priest. Naturally, I would not think that this raised the alarms for Mia's parents and relatives. A lot of times, we as adults chalk up a young child's behavior to tantrums, mood swings, their age, and their inevitable inability to regulate emotions and use words to express their thoughts. We so easily dismiss them and not really look beyond what is visibly presented to us in the moment. So I cannot really fault Mia's parents and relatives for not seeing past the tears and hesitation to be near Buenacosa. In any case, Buenacosa's fondness for children did not go unnoticed amongst the people who worked with him in the parish. Whether they interpreted his fondness as something harmless or something malicious can only be determined retrospectively, I suppose. The parish's secretary and cook stated, for example, that the priest often joked and played with the children who were at the daycare, something that is not alarming necessarily. Ask any Catholic and they will tell you stories about priests who are fond of children and who are beloved by them. Whilst I'm sure some of them may have been like Buenacosa, some of them may have been not. So I can imagine that the parish workers did not feel something was off with Buenacosa initially based on his apparent rapport with children. But they did observe something more, something disturbing, and could not possibly be chalked up to a priest being friendly. According to the cook and the parish secretary, quote, "Whenever Father Aron sees the girl in the office sitting with her crotch exposed, Father Aron would correct her and admonish her to sit properly. When the girl did not immediately change her position, the priest would ask us to give him a pair of scissors and threaten to cut the girl's crotch." End of quote. Bem, the mother, also recalled some moments that were perhaps a tad odd back when they happened, but made sense right now. Bem told the Washington Post that Buenacosa often teased Mia, who would end up crying. She now thought that perhaps this was his way of threatening Mia so that she did not end up telling her parents about the sexual abuse. A day after Mia revealed she was being sexually abused by Father Aron Buenacosa, the Catholic Church got involved. No surprise there. Buenacosa called Bishop Gerardo Alminasa, head of the diocese in San Carlos. According to the Washington Post, the bishop gave Buenacosa a laundry list of instructions as per the protocol mandated by the Catholic institution. Furthermore, he, quote, told the distressed priest to celebrate a last mass that Sunday. After that, Alminasa would relieve Buenacosa of his duties and dispatch another priest to take his place. End of quote. An emergency meeting was then called with the rest of the diocese's priests, who were more than perturbed by the accusations made by Mia. Buenacosa attended the meeting by phone and consistently insisted that he was innocent. According to the Washington Post, after this meeting, Bishop Alminasa initiated his own investigation as per Vatican protocols, giving the Vatican regular reports about what he had learned about the allegations so far. At this point, some people were asking, where was Buenacosa during the first few days of the investigation? It did not seem that he was being detained by the police. A Vatican spokesperson explained to the Washington Post that Buenacosa was being subjected to measures to keep him away from minors. At that time, he was being housed at a property 3 hours away from Cadiz City. Still too near for my taste, to be honest. In any case, by the 27th of February 2019, he was charged with allegedly violating Republic Act 7610, or the Special Protection of Children Against Abuse, Exploitation, and Discrimination Act.
Republic Act 7610, Special Protection of Children Against Abuse, Exploitation, and Discrimination Act. It is an act providing for stronger deterrence and special protection against child abuse, exploitation, and discrimination, providing penalties for its violation and for other purposes. It shall be the policy of the state to protect and rehabilitate children gravely threatened or endangered by circumstances which affect or will affect their survival and normal development, and over which they have no control. But who are covered by these laws? Children. It refers to persons below 18 years of age, or those over but are unable to fully take care of themselves or protect themselves from abuse, neglect, cruelty, exploitation, or discrimination because of physical or mental disability or condition.
What was weird, as I already said, however, was that I do not think Buenacosa was ever detained after the charge was laid. In some articles, the diocese was being accused of hiding the priest, which the diocese, of course, denied. They stated that they were cooperating with the legal process but also providing the priest with pastoral care. This sounded very much like preferential treatment to me. If an ordinary Filipino man, a man who is not of the clergy or of the cloth, were to be charged with the same offenses as Buenacosa, I do not think that the need for pastoral care would be seen as a legitimate reason to spare a suspect detention before an arraignment or even a trial. The news sources are unclear here, so I am left speculating as to this specific issue. In any case, I get that the Catholic Church, through their representatives in Cadiz City, were trying hard to project a non-partisan or unbiased position, but it is still clear that there was a hint of wanting to minimize the offense and protect Buenacosa. As expected, the media started to latch on to the case, as they are always wont to do, thankfully. Not only were fingers pointed at Buenacosa himself and the diocese he belonged to, but also at the Vatican, especially at Pope Francis, who, unlike his predecessors, seemed to have taken a hard line about dealing with the seemingly systemic problem of child sexual abuse in many Catholic churches around the world and also Catholic institutions. If you really look at the big picture here, this case in a small city somewhere in the Philippines can prove pivotal for how child sexual cases are going to be dealt with not only locally, but also in other countries where victims are still being silenced and even threatened. This could be a real test case for the Catholic Church if it goes through criminal proceedings without a hitch. Now, it must be said here that Buenacosa did not just pop out of the blue with these allegations against him. Buenacosa's behavior had been flagged down before when rumors arose about him having girlfriends, none of which were minors apparently. But still, one can see a pattern here of having this confidence of going against his own vows of celibacy. I certainly could not fault you if somewhere in your mind right now you're asking what else Buenacosa had done that did not make the light of day. I know I had these thoughts because it is entirely possible that Mia had not been his first victim. Again, this is speculation. Fast forwarding to March 2019, the Washington Post reported that whilst Buenacosa had been provided with 2 lawyers, Mia's family could not afford even one. They asked the president himself for help when he stopped by Cadiz for a midterm election campaign stop. It is, however, unclear whether the president did eventually provide the family with any sort of help, but what we do know is that by September 2019, when the trial started, the family had one lawyer allocated to them in a courtroom filled mostly with Buenacosa supporters. As you can remember from earlier, the priest was charged with allegedly violating Republic Act 7610, or the Special Protection of Children Against Abuse, Exploitation, and Discrimination Act. At the start of the trial, he pleaded not guilty. As for the trial itself, the Washington Post reported that Mia was the first witness who was called for the prosecution. According to the same report, Mia, quote, spoke privately in the judge's chambers with her mother and a social worker at her side. The only other people present were the prosecutor, the defense lawyer, and a stenographer, end of quote. Unfortunately, the transcript of Mia's testimony is not publicly available. I wish it had been, but I can understand why this was not made public just yet. Now, other witnesses were called as the trial went on, including the medical examiner and Bem, the mother. But the trial has proven to be a heavy burden on the family so far. They do not have a private lawyer to get any additional advice from. So the case is at the mercy of their allocated lawyer and the prosecutor. Bem and her husband Noy, Mia's father, had also complained in the past how there were instances when they were not even informed of cancellations and rescheduling of hearings, something I deem as especially cruel and a failing of the court as well as the prosecution. Furthermore, the family had never received any support, financial or otherwise, to help their daughter with therapy. As of 2 years ago, the Washington Post indicated that both Bem and Noy were pulling their last remaining funds together to send Mia to a therapist in Bacolod, all on their own dime. And you might be thinking the same thing here, as in, where was the DSWD to help this family get their daughter into therapy? This made me wonder right away where the Department of Social Welfare and Development was to aid the family in getting that therapy for free for Mia. See, whenever I bang on about the system being broken and anti-poor, this is exactly what I mean. Sexual abuses by priests in richer communities are less likely to happen. If they do happen, the police and the legal system usually scramble to make sure the rich citizens are heard in court as soon as possible, or at least they are able to afford the best lawyers to push their case through the unbelievably murky waters that is the Filipino criminal justice system. And then we have our poor kababayans who are more prone to systemic abuse, such as the one demonstrated by many Catholic priests. When their case does get to court, the family of the abused usually gives up because they lack the funds and support from places like the DSWD. And so for decades now, the majority of sexual abuse cases involving priests never even make it past the questioning at the police station. The cases are usually buried and the victims live a life of trauma and uncertainty. Much like Mia, who may or may not still be in therapy now, something that she will likely need for the rest of her life. As for Mia and her family, they had been virtually ostracized by most of their community. Many had sided with Buenacosa, accusing the family of purposefully ruining the priest's reputation, amongst other things. And yet Mia stays strong, according to her parents who talked to the Washington Post about how Mia once prayed to God to help them jail Buenacosa so that he cannot hurt other children anymore. Sadly, Mia had to grow up so quickly in order to deal with the abuse and trauma she had gone through and the social rejection her family is currently experiencing. As if those things were not enough, the trial is currently dragging on due to the pandemic. So far, there's not been any major update in this case, and it might take a few more months, if not years, to get a verdict. If nothing else, I hope that one thing was made clear by this episode. Whenever the Catholic Church is embroiled in a child sexual abuse controversy, an immediate power imbalance is created. Most victims are from poorer or more rural communities where a priest is truly seen as God's representative on earth and could never ever do anything wrong. The odds are immediately stacked against the victim, the survivor, and anyone who sides with them. Whatever this says about our Filipino society and our relationship with the Catholic Church, please do remember this. Any sexual abuse victim knows that by accusing a beloved public figure could mean ostracization and or social rejection for the accuser. There is a high price to pay for coming out with such an accusation. So, as much as possible, I beg you, believe the victims. Lagim fam, I hope you found that episode interesting. I realize that this episode is much shorter than my usual episodes on Lagim, where I do a lot of 1 hour or 50-minute episodes. The reason why this episode is short is because it is still an ongoing case and so many things are still unclear or not revealed yet to the public. As I said in the episode, it is still an ongoing court case, and so many things will still be revealed as time will go on. I waited for at least half a year to write the script and also record this episode, and I thought maybe I should wait for another year to actually tackle this case, but I felt compelled to do it now because there are so many cases out there that are current, that are important to know about, and they warrant a discussion and some opinion sharing, I suppose, now and not later. So please don't worry, Lagim is not changing to less deep dive type of discussions and episodes. I will make sure that the next episodes are longer episodes again. At this point, I would like to shout out Regine Cabato, who is a journalist for The Washington Post, who wrote the article I so heavily relied on for this episode. If you are unable to access the article written by Ms. Cabato, send me a private message, a DM, and I may be able to give you some advice to get past the paywall. Alternatively, I will try to put the article in PDF form and put it on some Google Drive. So make sure to check either that or Lagim's blog for a complete list of sources, especially the Washington Post article. Lastly, I want to shout out a Lagim fam listener, Julia and Varga from South Carolina in the US, who suggested the past case on Christine Dacera. She suggested the case to me, and I promised that I would give her a shout out when the episode airs. But unfortunately, I forgot and I am mortified. So Julia, if you're listening to this, I am very sorry, and I'm giving you a shout out now. Thank you so much for reaching out to me. Having said all that, I just want to thank you for listening to this episode, Lagim Fam. As you know, this is an independent podcast without any sponsors just yet. So if you want to help me keep the podcast afloat, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon or giving me a one-off donation through buymecoffee.com. All the links are in the show notes. And also, please don't forget to rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Again, thank you for listening. Until next episode, maraming salamat at mabuhay.